This is the Radio Academy podcast. My name is Christian Hewgill, and every week we shine a light on something new that's happening in the wonderful world of radio, podcasts or audio. But this week our task is to shine a light on something quite old, actually.
You're listening to Absolute Radio Pirates.
Absolute Radio Pirates.
On Friday the 12th of August, for one day only, Absolute Radio launched pop-up station Absolute Radio Pirates. It was made possible by the Audio Content Fund, which helps independent producers make high-quality public service content for UK commercial and community radio. Now, the executive producer of the project was Jon Holmes. He's been a producer and presenter who's been on everything from Radio 2 to 6 Music, XFM, Talk Radio, and most recently Radio 4. Now, Jon is a very funny man. He's known for having a unique style. So when I welcome my guests to the podcast, I usually don't leave that bit in the edit. But with Jon, well, there was no leaving this bit out, was there? Jon, welcome to the Radio Academy podcast.
Thank you very much, Christian. I think you've taken my Radio Academy podcast virginity from me. I think that's what you've done. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And what a pleasure it is to do, Jon. That's a sentence I never thought I'd say. Jon, we're talking about pirates. And where did you first sort of fall in love, start to recognise pirate radio?
Well, I suppose I sort of came to it slightly late. So I'm old now, Christian, but I'm not as old as to have listened to it the first time round. Let's put it that way. So obviously its reputation and the influence it's had on our entire industry is enormous. I mean, we know that without it we wouldn't have music radio as we have it in this country. It can't be underestimated. Just where it's got us all, and so the idea of self-driven, because prior to pirate radio, announcers had scripts and read them into microphones and dressed in dinner jackets. And when pirate radio came along, it was self-op stuff, which today is, unless you're certain presenters who come from television on Radio 2, who might need someone to help you. Most of it is operated by us, by the presenters. We self-drive. And so, and that paved the way for that. Kenny Everett and Tony Blackburn designed, did you know this? Kenny Everett and Tony Blackburn designed the BBC's self-op desks. That's what they did. As
if the influence of those two guys could get any more.
I know. But when the BBC came calling at the tail end of the pirate radio, when the Marine Act came in and they started getting poached and to set up Radio 1 and all the rest of it, they just stood back and went, look, okay, what do you need? What do we do? How do you want this to work? And Kenny and Tony went in as consultants and said, well, you need one of these, you need two of them, you need that, you need that, you need that, and helped design the first studios. So, yeah, there's a thing that I've learned from Absolute Radio Pirates production that we've been doing.
And where it moves nicely into Absolute Radio Pirates, where did the idea come about from? How did it all start?
Well, it came about in a phone call with Paul Sylvester, really, and he said, look, it's the anniversary of the Marine Offences Act coming up in August, and we'd like to do what we sort of did with Absolute Radio 40s and do a pop-up station for the day, but a pirate radio station and tell the story. And you're a geek, Jon. Can you have a think about that? And I went, yes, this is great. So we did it through the Audio Content Fund. So we worked out a bid and we put it in. The idea came before Paul, even, from a guy called Gary Hornbuckle, who is an engineer at Absolute, who went to Paul with the idea and said, look, what about this? And Paul went, that's great. Called me, that's great. We talked to the Audio Content Fund and so on and so forth. So Gary's really the origin of all of this. And then what we decided to do was we could do, it's got to tell the story, but what I was really keen to do was take all of the archive, because there's so much of it, and recreate a pirate radio station. So it's Absolute Radio Pirates, but what we've done is redo a pirate radio station using archive, so it sounds like you're listening live on air to a pirate radio station, but using all of the presenters, John Peel, Kenny Everett, Tony Blackburn and Johnny Walker have joined us because they're alive, Christian. And
they will be keen to point out.
I'm keen, they're keen. They said, if you're doing interviews about this, Jon, do say we're alive. So I've done my job now. Ed Stewart's in there, not alive. Tommy Vance, not alive. But we've built up this entire radio station with all of these massive names that you'll remember and know from this history. with Tony and Johnny sort of anchoring it as well. And we've got modern names in there talking about it. We've got Leona Graham from Absolute, Jordan and Perry from Kiss Breakfast talking about, how they could not be doing their jobs without the stuff that Pirate Radio trailblazed. We've got David Lloyd in there talking about some of the history. Tim Blackmore's talking about, what his connection to it all. Sean Keaveney's on it. Zeb Soanes, ex-Radio 4 newsreader Zeb Soanes, is reading the news of the day as though those bulletins are live, which is fantastic.
This is the news, and this is Zeb Soanes reading it. Dateline August 1964. A massive manhunt is underway across Britain after one of the so-called Great Train Robbers escaped from Winson Green Prison in Birmingham. Charlie Wilson, 32, was apparently freed by a gang of 3 men who broke into the jail in the early hours of the morning. Wilson was sentenced to 30 years in jail just 4 months ago.
There's loads of stuff involved in this, and it's all come together, and there's 6 hours of a pirate radio station that we've invented, and that will loop, so it'll be on for that 24 hours. So all put together by producer Laura Grimshaw, and it sounds fantastic, honestly. Brilliant stuff. And we go in and out, we've got the actual links from the jocks at the time, introducing and back-annoing songs, but obviously we're dropping the listenable version of the song in the gap, but mixing between them, so it sounds like you're in and out with the actual DJs of the time. But then obviously you don't want to listen to a crackly song broadcast from a ship for 3 minutes, do you? Lord no. So we've actually got the proper versions of the songs in there to do all the work for us, but it sounds great.
Hi, I'm Tony Blackburn, and I'm taking you on a trip back to the swinging 60s. On the 14th of August 1967, a new law called the Marine Offences Act came into force, which made it illegal for any British subject to have anything to do with a pirate radio station, whether it be presenting, advertising, supplying, or promoting it.
The archive exists, so there's a museum of offshore radio that have all this stuff, and we've been working in conjunction with them, and they have been very generous with material and said, well, we've got this, we've got Kenny Everett phoning in to Absolute Radio Pirates while he's on tour with the Beatles in America. All done as though it's happening in front of you. It's fantastic, just recreating that whole thing with the archive and then putting the music in, to fill those gaps. So it's been Laura, who's done the day-to-day producing on it, has done a fantastic job, and is now, I think, her ears and her brain must be just full of 60s archive. And she's really, really immersed herself in it, and as have we all had to, really. But to do a sort of pop-up radio station that sounds like it's coming from the past is a great thing to get involved in.
I'm a bit of a radio geek. I'm no David Lloyd, the radio historian, but, a bit of a radio geek. I can't remember anything being done like this before. Do you think I'm right?
I think so. Absolute Radio 40s was the sort of germ of the idea, but and having listened to that, and I thought it was great, but it's very different to this, because we've just used that. Obviously, in the 40s, you didn't have that kind of radio archive to go on. You had memories and some music, but here we've got tons of stuff from all of the pirates. So we've brought it all together to, create this. Well, it is. It just sounds like you're listening to a live radio station, as it should do, and that's what I wanted to do. And I think you're right. I don't know. I don't think somebody will write in and go, "Well, I think you'll find this was done before." But to my knowledge, I think it's the first time this, what someone's created an entire day's radio station out of archive and current presenters.
And we know from your BBC Radio 4 show, The Skewer, which has been hugely successful, you like to take audio and play with it and mess about with it and almost manipulate it in many ways and change it. Therefore, have you enjoyed this process of kind of giving this audio that already exists a new lease of life?
Very much so, yeah. Shout out to my Skewer co-noise wrangler, Tony Churnside, as well, who's been working on this with us. And he... and getting from that old crackly archive intro music and then blending it into the modern track, or the modern version of the track, if you see what I mean, seamlessly to make it sound a little bit Skewer-like. Yeah, we've had quite a lot of fun doing that.
You're listening to Absolute Radio Pirates.
Absolute Radio Pirates.
I'll be honest with you, Laura did the heavy lifting. You know, she's been fantastic at this and going, right, she's at one point we were looking at a spreadsheet she'd drawn up which had something like 2,000 hours of archive on it.
Oh my word, Laura.
26 pages of spreadsheet of broken down. I know, exactly. It broken down into, okay, Kenny talks about this, Tommy Vance talks about that, John Peel does that, Keith Skews does that, Ed Stewart does, that's weird that he's done, let's not put that in. You know, and what we've also got is all of the ads of the time. So a lot of them couldn't be broadcast now anyway, because they're for cigarettes mostly. But some of them, I mean, have you heard of this product, Christian? Apparently it was brand new in the 60s. It's called cling film. I wonder if it will catch on. So there's an advert. I mean, it literally catches on, doesn't it? It catches onto the side of containers. But it's ladies, would you like something to cover up your leftovers? Why not try cling film? It's great, really good stuff. Gentlemen, who has the car this weekend? Is it you or your wife? Well, stop all the arguments with car hire.
And if you'd like to hear Walker on the Wireless then, listen to this piece of advice.
Take your lightning companion wherever you go. Take a portable radio. Take a portable radio.
Honestly, you dive back into the whole archive and you find these gems. I mean, there's a brilliant bit where Tony Blackburn starts telling, not from archive, I mean, he just tells us the story of, you thought Wagatha Christie was a modern phenomenon, right? Where she, Colleen Rooney, dropped fake news into her Instagram feed. And as we all know now, it's Rebecca Vardy's account, right? And Tony Blackburn and the Pirates were doing this back in the 60s. They were putting fake news bulletins into their news because they thought other pirate stations were stealing it. So they were doing it for little traps to find out if they broadcast something about a seal smoking a cigar washed up on the shores of Southend. They broadcast that and then found that other radio stations were reporting it as well because they were just nicking it from them. And they're all stealing from each other, which is a great story. Fake news.
It's the Pirates Rebecca Vardy's account, isn't it? That's exceptional. I mean,
there's your headline.
There's the headline. John, I mean, as you say, we've got presenters from the current times in there, like the Kiss Breakfast team, like Sean Keaveney, also, you know, presenters from those times. Is there a particular favourite bit of yours from the 6 hours that you're like, I can't wait for people to hear this?
I couldn't possibly pick one. It's honestly, I've just been listening to it over and over because, you know, for just to get the tech right and all the rest of it. And it's just fantastic. You know, it's packed full of music, so it sounds like a radio station. It's got, you know, Johnny Walker and Tony Blackburn are such brilliant storytellers, telling, you know, all these stories about what they got up to. It might be, I think it's quite a famous story, but Johnny tells it so well, it is in there, where he, I don't want to spoil it, but let's just say that Johnny Walker, early on, and he talks about this, so it's fine, early on in his career, had some shore leave and may have been introduced to some narcotic experiences, right?
Right.
When he got back to the ship, he had a code, right? When they ran out on the ship, okay? He had a code that he'd just say on air, knowing that the girl who, you know, helped him through this would listen to that and then go, oh, I'll send some more out, okay? But unfortunately, the code that he used resulted in every listener sending the actual product. It was tea bags to the ship, so they were just inundated with tea bags instead of what they actually wanted. Let's just leave it like that. But it's a great story, and it's just one of, you know, hundreds that they tell. So yeah, it's.
And little did they know that in modern times, decent quality tea at radio stations is worth its weight in gold.
You're absolutely right, actually. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If only that was you could do that now. And the archive as well, you know, the Kenny Everett stuff particularly, you can hear the genius of his work from those very early days of Kenny just taking music radio but doing something very different with it. You know, it was a huge influence on me early on. And I came to Kenny late through his TV work and then went back and listened to his radio stuff. So to hear that, you know, the germs of that, you know, the seeds of what Kenny started doing with music radio is just fantastic to behold.
I mean, John, I suppose just finally, it sounds like a little bit of a love letter almost to the kind of start of this industry that we all love.
It is. It's exactly that. And as Tim Blackmore points out, and David Lloyd on the station, without that, radio in this country would not be what it is now.
I very much enjoyed talking to Jon, and I very much enjoyed listening to Absolute Radio Pirates. If you missed it, of course, you can listen back to every second of it. It is on the Absolute Radio app. Now, Jon mentioned the impact pirate radio had in setting up BBC Radio 1, and my guest next week is one of its most popular and successful presenters in all its long history.
This is the official chart show
with Scott Mills
on Radio 1.
It's 4 o'clock and this is the official chart show live across the UK. I'm Scott, and for the next 3 hours on Radio 1, I'll be counting down the top 40 singles, the top 20 albums, and the biggest DVDs.
Radio 1.
Next week, a specially extended Scott Mills special, as I sit down with Scott to talk about his 24 years on BBC Radio 1. I look forward to talking to you then. Bye for now.